Everyone. My name is Debbie Feinstein, and I am the Chief of the Special Victims Division for the Montgomery County State's Attorney's Office. And I have the privilege of chairing the Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, which is a county group that has multiple different government agencies, non-government agencies, nonprofits, community members that come together to work on education and prevention around domestic violence and consent, and to try to really do education and prevention work, as well as some other initiatives during the course of the year. Tonight, you are participating in a webinar called Let's Talk Consent. And this webinar is going to cover sexual assault, consent, bystander intervention, how to help a friend, and community resources. The question that's probably on many of your minds relates to SSL hours. You are going to hear more about SSL hours at the end of the presentation. Going back a slide, I would just mention that we are going to be talking about violence and really serious topics and going into some level of detail. That's why this program is limited to 8th through 12th graders. What you're going to hear tonight might be hard to hear. It might be hard to talk about. If you need to talk to someone during the course of this presentation, please call the 24-hour hotline from the victim to VASA at 240-777-4357. And this is the county program that supports victims and individuals that have concerns about sexual assault and other forms of victimization. So please feel free to call 240-777-4357. That number will continue to appear at the bottom of our screen during the course of the presentation so that you're able to access it. Tonight, we're going to start with a presentation, and then we're going to follow it with a Q&A. We can go back to the slide on SSL. I'm jumping around a little bit. Thank you so much. This evening, you will get 2.5 SSL hours for attending this event. We're going to share a form at the end of the presentation. It must be filled out by tomorrow at 5 p.m. So that's by Wednesday, March 23rd at 5 p.m. If you go to a private school, you're not going to be able to access this form because it requires an MCPS email address. So if you go to a private or independent school, please email smitha at montgomerycountymd.gov, smitha at montgomerycountymd.gov to get your SSL hour form completed. Please note that this 2.5 hours is in addition to any other hours that you accumulate by participating in any of the RespectFest events. So if you came to the opening webinar last night, you can get SSL hours for that. You can get SSL hours for all of the other asynchronous events this week. We'll talk a little bit more about all that at the end. But this 2.5 hours is in addition to the 5 hours you can get by participating in the virtual events and the 3 hours that you can get by coming to the festival on Sunday, the outdoor festival at Wheaton Recreation Community Center. So we look forward to talking to you more about that. Our presentation is going to be followed by a panel. So the presentation will be the first part of the conversation this evening, and then there'll be a panel with live Q&A. Our panelists tonight, we're very privileged to have 2 moderators, 2 students. We're going to moderate the panel. We have Annie Antoinetti, who is a junior at Whitman, and she is a member of the Choose Respect, RespectFest Student Advisory Committee, and we're excited to have her join us this evening. We also have Arth Babar, who is a freshman at Poolsville High School, and he is also a member of the Student Advisory Committee. So we look forward to having them moderate the panel in the second hour of our conversation. I'm also going to introduce our other panelists. We will be monitoring the Q&A during the presentation. So if you have questions, you can put them there. Some will be answered in the Q&A, and some will be answered live during the second hour. And we will do our very best to get to all of the questions and get answers to them. But I have to tell you, I can't guarantee we're going to get to all of them, but we will definitely try. So if you end up having questions at the end of the presentation, please go to the Family Justice Center website and send us an email. We'd love to hear from you. So let me take a moment to introduce our panelists. Our first panelist this evening is Captain Amy Dom. She's the director of the Montgomery County Police Special Victims Investigation Division. She has been with the department since 2003, and she has served in a variety of positions, including a detective, in internal affairs, and working in our 1st, 3rd, and 5th police districts. Dr. Rafia Prince, PhD, is a supervising therapist with Montgomery County's Trauma Services, which includes the county's Rape Crisis Center and the Victim Assistance and Sexual Assault Program. That's the long version of VASAP, which is the acronym that you see at the bottom of your screen. In addition, Dr. Prince is the co-chair of the Montgomery County Sexual Assault Response Team and the staff liaison for the Victim Services Advisory Board. Colleen Bachman, who is a licensed clinical social worker, is also a supervisory therapist with Montgomery County's Trauma Services. Ms. Bachman is a member of Montgomery County's Divorce and Family Law Roundtable and chair of the Roundtable's Racial Equity Committee. She also serves on a work group within the Domestic Violence Collaboration Council, focusing on the impact of domestic violence on children. Smitha Varia is the program manager of the Montgomery County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council. In this capacity, she manages initiatives to make sure victims and offenders are getting the services they need and conducts trainings and workshops around the county to spread awareness about domestic and dating violence. So welcome to our panelists. It's great to see everyone this evening. And again, we look forward to continuing the conversation with them in the second hour. For now, Smitha and I are going to start the presentation. And like I said a few moments ago, we are going to be talking about pretty serious topics. And if you need help, please reach out. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. And we'll try to get to those questions as we go.
Debbie, I just want to interrupt. I see a couple of questions. I just want to clear something up really quickly. A lot of people are asking about the SSL out form. This specific webinar has a separate SSL hour form that will be shown at the end of this webinar. For yesterday's webinar and anything else you do this week, all of those are clumped together for the 5-hour opportunity. That SSL hour form is on our website, but only for this webinar do you fill out the SSL hour form at the end that we will show you at 9 o'clock when this ends today. I hope that clears up any confusion.
Thank you so much for that. Okay, so let's get started. True or false? Sexual assaults are committed by strangers. You can put your answer in the chat if you'd like. The answer is false. 7 out of 10 victims of rape know the perpetrator, know the person that raped them. Next question. Men can be raped too. True or false? Again, you can put your answers in the chat. You can just think them in your head. Either way, whatever works for you. So men can be raped too. True. 1 out of every 10 rape victims are male. Lastly, what someone wears or what they had to drink makes them responsible for sexual assault. True or false? False. Sexual assault is never the victim's fault. And I'm also going to correct what I said before. The chat is actually closed, so you can use the Q&A to ask questions. The chat is actually closed, so you'll just answer these questions to yourself and hopefully, learn something along the way. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. One more. Sexual assault victims have bruises or cuts or physical injury. So is that true or false? Do sexual assault victims always have bruises or cuts or physical injury? The answer is no. Sexual assault can occur without visible physical injury. There may be internal injury, and sometimes there may not be injury at all. And we'll talk a little bit more about that during the course of the presentation. Lastly, victims of sexual assault handle the assault and what happens afterwards in different ways. This is true. Each individual person may handle, what happened to them in very different ways, and we'll talk about that too. And they may handle it in ways that are unexpected, and not ways that you would think that someone would act. They may not be sad, they may not be angry, they may be indifferent. They may close up and withdraw and feel depressed. And there's lots of different ways that people can react. Next slide, please. So we're going to spend a minute talking about some of the statistics around sexual violence in students. 6.7% of high school students have reported that they have been physically forced to have sexual intercourse. So that's close to 7 individuals out of 100 have been physically forced to have sexual intercourse. High school students. So if you look at the breakdown, 2.1% ninth grade boys, 3.9% 10th grade boys, 2.8% 11th grade boys, 3.5% 12th. And then in terms, and this is, can we go back? And then in terms of girls, 9.4 ninth graders, 7.9 10th graders, 12% 11th, and 11.9% 12th. And I just want to note that this is from a youth risk behavior survey in 2015. And at that time, they only gave the gender options of boys and girls. Obviously, we've really evolved in our terminology, and not only our terminology, but in the way that we think about gender. That was not an option in this study, and that's why we're referring to boys and girls only. But really, we'll do our best to refer to male identified, female identified, and every which way in between. Go ahead. Who commits sexual violence against you? Of sexual assault cases reported to law enforcement, 93% of juvenile victims knew the perpetrator. So that means that most sexual assault cases involve people that know each other. It's not strangers. 59% were acquaintances, 34% were family members, and only 7% were strangers. So that's something to really keep in mind. The effects of sexual violence are incredibly significant. Young people who experience sexual violence may experience all sorts of, associated issues. They may do poorly in school, engage in sexually risky behavior, get pregnant is a possible, issue as well, engage in self-harm, develop mental health conditions, and experience further abuse as an adult. So experiencing sexual violence as a young person, as an adolescent, unfortunately puts people at greater risk for all of these other things. And that's why, as you see the support line below, that's why we're going to talk a lot tonight about resources that are available and ways that individuals can get help and support so that these adverse outcomes don't, that we can minimize these adverse outcomes. Sexual harassment in students. Sexual harassment is different than sexual assault. Sexual assault is some sort of physical contact that's sexual in nature. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but sexual harassment can be verbal. It can also be physical, but it can also be verbal. And this is from a study of 7th to 12th grade students where 56% of girls experienced sexual harassment and 40% of boys experienced sexual harassment. And you can see the other statistics in terms of how people experienced sexual harassment. And note that there was information in this 2013 study that included sexual harassment online. So we're going to talk next about race and sexual violence. African American and Hispanic girls are more likely to experience sexual violence than white girls, unfortunately. And you can see the statistics. The statistics are close, but there are distinctions. And again, I would just note that all of these studies just did sort of the two genders as opposed to considering, transgender and other options. Those were not available at the time, or not considered at the time, but we want to provide you with some information and some statistics nonetheless. Next slide, please. There have been studies that have looked at LGBTQA+ and sexual violence. And again, unfortunately, LGBTQA+ students are more likely to experience sexual harassment and sexual violence than heterosexual youth. And in one study, 81% of transgender youth experienced some form of sexual harassment. 29.9% of lesbian or bisexual girls indicated that they had been forced to have sexual intercourse. And 25.5% of gay or bisexual boys indicated that they had been forced to have sexual intercourse. So some very concerning statistics. Disability and sexual violence. Youth with physical disabilities are also, unfortunately, more likely to experience sexual violence than youth without physical disabilities. And you can see the statistics here. In one study, over 22% of youth with physical disabilities experienced contact sexual violence, and this is 1.74 times higher than others. And that is obviously, again, of great concern. I think it's important to recognize and see these distinctions, but also to know that no one is immune, unfortunately, from sexual violence. And you can see, the prevalence and the statistics around it. And that's exactly why we're having this conversation tonight. Next slide. So what is sexual assault? It can take many forms, but the one thing that is consistent is that sexual assault is never the victim's fault. It is never the victim's fault. We're going to probably say that multiple times tonight, but it is never the victim's fault. Next slide. So sexual assault refers to sexual contact or behavior that occurs without the explicit consent of the victim. So what does that mean? That means that it's explicit consent. And we're going to talk more about consent in general as we go through the course of this conversation tonight. But it doesn't have to necessarily mean intercourse of some form. It includes rape and attempted rape. It includes any unwanted sexual touching. It can be over or under the clothes. It can be forcing someone to perform or receive sexual acts such as oral sex. And so it can come in a variety of different ways. We prosecute sexual assault cases under fourth degree sexual offense for things like grabbing someone's butt, brushing the upper part of their thigh, touching someone's breast, even over the clothes in intimate areas. We're actually, and we've prosecuted for other things that are, concerning sexual touching. So those are just some of the examples. Next slide. So let's consider what rape is. So rape is a form of sexual assault, but not all sexual assault is rape. I'm going to define what second-degree rape is defined as in Maryland. In Maryland, rape includes vaginal or anal intercourse, oral sex, or other penetration. Penetration by fingers, penetration by an object, all of those are included in the definition of second-degree rape. And that was a change in the legislature a number of years ago. It used to be that there were different crimes that were included, that anal intercourse, oral sex, and other penetration was included as a second-degree sexual offense. But the legislators wanted to make it universal, that this type of conduct was considered rape because of the penetrative nature of what happened. And it has to also be by force or threat of force and without the consent of the other person. Those are the three criteria to define the criminal act of second-degree rape. Next slide. So here's some definitions. Penetration, however slight, is rape. Force, the amount of force that's necessary depends on the circumstances. So no particular amount of force is required, and the law does not require that the victim of sexual assault physically resist. Again, that was a change in the law more recently to recognize that someone may feel so paralyzed by what is happening to them that they're unable to physically resist what is happening. And I think that's a really important point for everyone to remember. Size differentials matter. No particular amount of force is required. Being someone being much larger than the other person, someone being on top of the other person not being able to move. These are all examples, and the law has many examples of how we can define force. And again, it all depends on the circumstances. Next. So what does consent mean? And we're going to, again, spend much more time this evening talking about that. Consent means actually agreeing to the act rather than merely submitting as a result of force or threat of force. The easiest way that I think about this is that yes means yeah. Yes, you have to get to the actual agreement, the affirmative agreement to the act, whether it's sex, whether it's oral sex, whether it's touching. Consent means actually agreeing rather than merely submitting as a result of force or threat of force. So there has to be that actual agreement. So there's also different definitions of rape. One of them, and we get a lot of questions as prosecutors about this too, is that if the victim is drunk, under the influence of drugs, unconscious, physically unable to resist or communicate that they do not consent, that is also rape. So basically, if someone is drunk or has taken drugs or is sleeping or unconscious or physically unable to resist or communicate, or if they have an intellectual or mental disability that makes them unable to resist or consent, that is also rape because they're unable to get to that affirmative yes. And all of those categories equate to the inability to get to that affirmative yes. Another definition of rape is statutory rape, which is based on an age differential. If the victim is under the age of 14 and the perpetrator is at least 4 years older than the victim. So what are some other offenses that we see in the context of sexual assault? I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about those. There's stalking. And stalking, we think about stalking and it can come in many different ways. It can come online, it can come in person. And I'm going to just give you the legal definition. So stalking is a malicious course of conduct that includes approaching or pursuing another person where the person knows or reasonably should have known that the conduct would place another in reasonable fear of either themselves or someone else, suffering serious bodily injury, assault, rape, attempted rapes, another sex offense, false imprisonment, or death. It also includes approaching or pursuing a person when the person should have known that what they were doing would cause serious emotional problems to another person. So, it's following around, it's leaving notes, it's not leaving the other person alone, Again, it can be through texting, it can be through email, it can be through social media, it can be through writing letters. All different forms have been recognized under the law as stalking. And stalking is an incredibly serious crime. Unfortunately, we see a pretty high correlation between people who stalk and people who commit serious offenses like homicide, like killing people. There's a huge correlation. So stalking is incredibly serious. Harassment. Harassment is basically a course of conduct. It has to be a malicious course of conduct that alarms or seriously bothers, annoys the other person. And the person who is being harassed has to give notice to the person that's harassing them, they have to tell them to stop. They have to say, you must stop bothering me, you must stop harassing me in order for it to be a crime. It doesn't mean that it's not harassment. We're talking about, these are all the criminal definitions for what brings this stuff to the level of a crime. And that also includes online harassment. So you know, even things that are not criminal in and of themselves can rise to the level of harassment or stalking if they're part of a course of conduct, if they're part of, you know, over and over and over again doing the same thing. Child pornography. So child pornography is exactly what it sounds like. It's sharing explicit images of a person that's under the age of 18. Email harassment is the same as harassment, but it's using electronic means. Sextortion. This is a relatively new statute in Maryland, and it prohibits someone from making someone else participate in sexual activity through threats. And the threats can include, you know, accusing them of a crime or anything like that. They can threaten them to, you know, threaten to cause physical injury. They can cause emotional distress. They can also threaten to cause economic damage to a person or to damage someone's property. So basically it's saying you have to engage in sex or sexual activity, or else I'm going to do X, Y, or Z. And that is now a crime in Maryland. And the last offense that I want to mention is revenge porn. That is an offense that that basically it's someone using a picture of someone else, that, you know, basically causing someone, you know, taking a picture of someone with their intimate parts showing, or someone engaging in some sort of sexual act. And then they threaten to use that and show it to other people, and you know, in you know, a revengeful way, if you will. It's kind of just, again, just like what it sounds like. And it can call, you know, and there are certain, you know, very specific criteria that we have to meet to prove it to be a crime. But it's basically using images of someone else as in a threatening way and in a way to, you know, make them look bad or cause them emotional distress and that sort of thing. So those are some additional definitions that kind of, they're akin and they're sort of part of this topic of consent, because this is all behavior that the person who is being victimized has not consented to, wants no part of. Next slide. So what is healthy sexual activity? It's engaging in relationships that are consensual, respectful, informed, honest, and safe. And I'm going to ask Smitha to pick up the conversation now.
Thank you, Debbie. So now we are going to get into a little bit more detail about consent. So Debbie did give a brief definition of what consent is earlier, but I really wanted to kind of reinforce that it's someone giving their permission for all sexual content that happens. It's freely given, it's of a person's own free will, and it's absent of pressure. So consent is also agreeing and saying yes throughout the entire act. So what does that mean? It means simply yes means yes. The absence of no doesn't mean yes. What does that mean? Just because somebody doesn't say no doesn't mean they're automatically saying yes. They may be scared, they may be crying, they might not say anything at all. But you want to make sure you get that affirmative, enthusiastic yes. It needs to be clear, affirmative expression of interest, desires, and wants of all parties involved. Drugs and alcohol do impact decision-making and blur consent. So a person who's intoxicated or impaired cannot give consent. It needs to be clear. Never assume and don't rely on past interactions. You must always ask. Just because you might have had sex in the past with the same person doesn't mean that you don't have to ask anymore. Each time is a new time for you to ask for consent. And it's specific, right? Consent needs to be about a specific act. Just because someone says yes to one thing doesn't mean they're going to say yes, and you assume that they're going to say yes for other sexual activity. Again, consent that may have been given on Monday does not apply for something you all are doing a few days later. You need consent each and every time. And most importantly, or very importantly, consent can be taken back at any time. So what does that mean? Someone says, yes, let's do this, let's go. You start fooling around, whatever it may be. If they then become uncomfortable or they change their mind and they say, you know what, I want to stop, I don't want to do this anymore, then the consent is gone and the other person must stop. So let's go over, what does consent sound like? We want to make sure it's affirmative. We want to make sure it's enthusiastic. So you can say things like, this is okay, absolutely, I like that, sure, yes, let's go, woohoo, whatever you want to say. That's enthusiastic and it's affirmative. Now, what does consent not sound like? It can sound like, I'm not ready, not tonight. It might sound like, I'm not sure. And this is sometimes a tricky one where somebody might say, I guess so, or maybe. Now, again, we want to make sure that consent is an affirmative yes. So saying, I guess so, or maybe is not affirmative. If I were to go up to my friend and say, hey, do you like my new shoes? And she says, I guess so. She's not really saying that she likes my new shoes. So I want you to think about that. And of course, stop and no are also very good ways to not give consent. Now, sometimes somebody might not say anything at all, but they're saying no through body language. They're pushing you away. They may be crying. They may be looking down or trying to leave the room. They are not giving consent. So I can't stress this enough. Silence does not equal yes. The only thing that equals yes is yes, or those other examples of affirmative consent. This is okay, great, I like that affirmative consent. And then when in doubt, just ask, right? Can I kiss you? Does this feel good? Are you comfortable? Do you want to go further? Do you like it if I? So if you're not sure, then you don't have affirmative consent. If you don't know what their answer is, then you need to assume and you need to say, okay, they are not consenting to this. So then simply just ask. So we want you to remember, it's mutual. All parties are agreeing. It's active, meaning that the consent is for everything that you all are doing. You're respecting boundaries. It's comfortable. It's retractable. Again, that means that somebody can change their mind. You're checking in and it's willingly given, right? There's no pressure. There's no alcohol or drug use. There's no threats, that it's willingly given. If you have any questions about consent, please put them in the question and answer, and we will get to it during the panel later. So now I want to talk a little bit about bystander intervention. So bystander intervention is recognizing a potentially harmful situation or interaction and choosing to respond in a way that could positively influence the outcome. So I'm going to talk about the warning signs. I'm going to talk about the barriers to bystander intervention, and then what we like to call the 5 Ds of bystander intervention. First, we will watch this video. If you are unable to hear the video, please turn your volume up.
slut.
She was
I
asking
mean,
for
yeah,
it.
look at her for dressing that
I feel
way.
bad for her
That
boyfriend.
skank was asking
Why
for
are
it.
girls like that such sluts?
Hey, I would have
Look
done
at
the
her
same
walking
thing if
around
it were
so
my
Look at her
girlfriend.
face.
She deserved it.
I'd hit her too.
I think that's a little harsh. No one deserves to be treated like that.
OMG, I fully agree.
Yeah, beating's wrong no matter what.
He shouldn't have hit her.
She's the victim.
You don't even know the details of the situation.
on their clothes.
She's not a slut.
It wasn't her
Her
fault.
outfit isn't the problem
All
here.
she did was wear clothes.
She's the one who got assaulted.
It wasn't her fault. It was
She
his.
was the victim. Don't be a bystander. Blaming the victim only makes it so much harder for them to say something. If you see someone being abused, speak out to help them, not hurt them. If your loved one is experiencing abuse by a partner, contact the Montgomery County Family Justice Center at 240-773-0444. I'm the victim.
So I did hear that PowerPoint was a little bit hard to hear, so I apologize for that. But that was the winner of our video contest back in a couple of years ago. And we will be announcing the winners of this year's video contest on Sunday at RespectFest. And I'm just trying to, there we go. So again, I apologize if you were unable to hear the message. So I wanted to go over some of the warning signs of when somebody might be uncomfortable in a situation. They may be reacting to touch that seems unwanted. They may be making facial expressions that are of concern or scared. Their body language, they may be frozen or trying to make themselves smaller. Somebody might be trying to push drinks on them. When you might see a friend focusing on somebody who seems uninterested but keeps bothering them and keeps trying to talk to them. There might be physical violence, pushing or shoving. You may hear aggressive language. And you might hear people talking about trying to get somebody drunk or making sexist or inappropriate jokes. These are all warning signs that you might hear at a party or with peers or at school that could lead you to be concerned about somebody. So what are barriers to intervening, right? You might not be sure what you're witnessing is something that you're seeing really dangerous or of concern. Very, very common is people might think that somebody else will step in. We all see what's going on, but somebody else will step in and take care of it. So I don't need to do anything. You might be worried about your own safety. Absolutely. You don't want to intervene. We'll talk about this a little bit. You don't want to intervene if your safety is something might happen to your safety. You might not feel like it's any of your business. Oh, that's their issue. I'm not going to butt in here. You don't want to be a snitch. You might not be sure of how to help. You're just not sure what to do. You're worried that you might get teased or embarrassed. You might make things worse, or your identities might make it difficult to step in. So that's why now we're going to talk about 5 different ways that you can safely step in. So they are the 5 Ds of bystander intervention, and we'll go through each of them. Direct, delegate, distract, debrief, and document. So the first one is direct. Call it like you see it, right? Point out the threatening or inappropriate behavior that you're seeing, whether it's in the school hallway or at a party or hanging out with friends. Just say, you know what, that joke was demeaning and it was not funny. Or, you could say, they said they didn't want to leave with you, so you need to back off. Or, leave them alone. But I want to stress that you shouldn't argue or debate with the person who's harassing. You want to make it clear. You want to make it direct. If that person responds, instead of engaging with the abuser or the harasser, focus your attention on the victim or the target to try and get them help. And of course, only directly intervene if it's safe to do so. If not, we want you to use another tactic. If you see something where violence is already happening, it's probably not safe for you to use this direct method. Instead, you'll want to use one of the other ones that we're going to talk about. Distract. Do anything to disrupt or interrupt a situation to keep it from escalating. You might see two people arguing. You can go up to the victim and be like, hey, let's go get some food. I'm hungry. Or, hey, come look at this funny TikTok. Or if you don't know them, you can be like, hey, aren't you in my math class? I have a question. Or, hey, do you know what time it is? Anything to distract what is going on in the moment. Another thing that you can do is delegate. You want to get other people to help you intervene. This might be getting one of their friends to step in and help, getting an adult, a teacher, a parent, another trusted adult to say, you know what, they're fighting in the hallway, can you step in? Or you can get a whole group of people together to then distract the interaction. Another method is to debrief. So this just means, check in with the person afterwards. The harassment has happened. And then afterwards, you can go up to them and say, are you okay? What they did was not okay. Do you want me to take you home? Do you want me to call someone for you? What happened is not your fault. And then lastly, if other people are already intervening, then you can help by documenting what's happening. So what does that mean? That means you can take photos or videos. You can note the date and time and place the incident is happening. However, the most important thing that you need to do if you document or if you video something is to give the documentation to the victim. Do not post the photos or videos on social media. Do not text them out to your friends without getting their permission. It'll probably just mean sending that video to them and then deleting it from your photo roll. You want to give the victim the choice of what to do with that documentation. So you can say something like, I took a video, I'll text it to you in case it's helpful, but then that's all you should do with that video. So how can you help a friend? If you suspect that your friend has been sexually assaulted, you want to approach them in a confidential manner and in a time and a place away from interruptions. You can start by gently talking about what you've observed. And then the best thing you can do is listen to what they have to say. They might tell you the whole story. They might say, I don't want to talk about it. I don't know what you're talking about. Everything is fine. But listen to them and be present. If they say nothing happened, I don't want to talk about it, leave it alone, but then check in with them again in maybe a couple of days. Maybe they just need time to kind of think about it themselves before they're ready to tell somebody. If your friend comes to you for help, we want you to be supportive and to listen. We want you to believe them. Make sure to give them time to open up. Again, they may just tell you like, yes, I was sexually assaulted on Friday. I don't really want to talk about it right now, but I just wanted to tell you. Okay, that's fine. Then maybe in a couple of days, they come up to you and tell you more, or you check in with them and say, hey, I just wanted to, touch base about what you told me the other day. I really want to make sure you're okay. Is there anything you want to talk about? Of course, do not make victim blaming statements. Victim blaming statements are things like, well, you shouldn't have gone to the party, or, but what were you wearing? Or what, we've heard about what they do at parties. You should have known, right? Any statement that puts the responsibility on them, you do not want to do. Ask them what you can do to help. It could be just listening to them. It could be looking up resources for them, the hotlines to call. It could be going with them to the counselor. Ask what they want your help in. You want to refrain from telling them what to do. And then, of course, refer them to resources. And we will talk about the resources later on. And actually, we will talk about the resources right now. So these are the resources in the county. The Montgomery County Family Justice Center works with victims of domestic and dating violence, and they are open business hours. If you are under the age of 16, they do need parental consent, but they can help with safety planning and counseling, peace orders, or protective orders. Those are kind of what we think of as restraining orders from the court. The Montgomery County Victim Assistance and Sexual Assault Program, they are able to assist anyone 12 or over. And the two of our panelists are from VASEP this evening. Shady Grove Adventist Healthcare Center, they are the hospital that does rape exams, rape kits, as you may have heard them. They're open 24 hours. You can go to any hospital after you've been assaulted, but Shady Grove Adventist Healthcare has a special unit that works with sexual assault and domestic violence victims. And then, of course, the RAIN hotline, which is the National Rape and Incest Hotline. There is their phone number. You can text with them, and then you can also chat with them online as well. I'm going to turn it back over to Debbie for the next few slides.
Thank you so much, Smitha, for all of that helpful information. I want to just make some notes about how you report if you attend Montgomery County Public Schools. I also want to note that none of us work for Montgomery County Public Schools, but this information, if you want to take a picture of the slide, you can follow up with your counselor or someone else at your school to learn more. But we did want to provide this information to you for reporting information if you attend MCPS. So you can contact your school principal, counselor, student welfare liaison, or any MCPS staff member. You can contact the police department, obviously call 911 in the event of an emergency. You can submit a bullying, harassment, or intimidation form. You can contact the MCPS Title IX coordinator. There's also an anonymous reporting system used to report threats to safety or well-being of students. It's called the Safe Schools Maryland Tip Line. You can also send a text to EveryMind, and the phone number is there. And again, I would encourage you to take a photograph of the slide if you'd like to capture this information. Okay, lastly, before we move on to our panel, we wanted to just remind everyone about the other events that are happening this week. Our big event this week that everything's going to culminate on Sunday with our live in-person outdoor event at the Wheaton Community Recreation Center, RespectFest 2022, and it is from 1 to 4 on Sunday. You can earn up to 3 SSL hours by coming and participating in the educational activities that are there. You're basically going to get a passport of sorts and be able to walk between different booths and collect information and stickers. And then you will show your stickers at the end of the night, at the end of the afternoon to our SSL coordinator, and she will give you a form. Again, if you attend a private or independent school, you can email Smitha Varia for, to be able to submit your form. That way, you can also take one of the MCPS forms and hopefully submit it to your school and have that count. But follow up with Smitha Varia if if you have questions. A couple of other notes. The event will be emceed by Hannah Oluni. Some of you may know her. She's a student member of the board. We have of the Board of Education. We have 6 performances by student groups. We're going to have yoga classes. There's going to be food trucks there with free food. And we're going to announce the winners of the Choose Respect video contest. So, we hope that you'll join us on Sunday, and there's going to be limited parking on site, but if you park at Einstein High School, there will be a free shuttle, or you can take a free bus from Richard Montgomery High School or Seneca Valley High School. And like I said, we hope to see you on Sunday. Lastly, I just want to mention, if you're interested in learning more and you're interested in bringing programs to your school, your youth group, your athletic team, any after school groups that you participate in, weekend groups, really any group of teens, and you're interested in bringing this content or content generally about healthy relationships and how to prevent dating violence, we are happy to bring those programs to you. As we've noted several times, there was a video contest this year that is, we've received the submissions, we've identified the top 5. Those winners will be announced on Sunday. The top prize is $1,000. You also can have the opportunity by going to our website to to vote on a fan favorite, and that fan favorite will win an additional $500. So pretty exciting stuff. And if you didn't participate this year, participate next year. You can get some SSL hours. You can potentially win $1,000. It's a win-win. We're going to transition now to our panel. I'm going to ask our panelists to please turn on their videos. We have received some questions in the Q&A that have been, there are a number of questions that have already been answered, and there's some of the questions that are going to be answered live. But right now I'm going to turn it over to Annie and Arth, who are going to take us through a number of questions, and we'll be asking our esteemed panelists, as I introduced at the beginning, Colleen Bachman, Dr. Rafia Prince, and Captain Amy Dom. Colleen Bachman and Dr. Prince are with Trauma Services with the county, and Captain Amy Dom is the director of the Special Victims Investigation Division for the Police Department. And we look forward to more questions from you, and we look forward to hearing from our panelists this evening. Turn it over to Annie and Arth. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Ms. Feinstein. Our first question is, if someone is sexually assaulted or has a friend who is sexually assaulted and they want to get help from the county, what do they need to do? And this question is for either Dr. Prince or Ms. Bachman.
Okay, I'll take that question. So if you want help from the county, what you can do is call one of our lines and we will respond. And when you call, we provide an array of services, which includes therapeutic services. We have groups, we have all types we have victim advocates and ways to support you through this process. We even link you to if you need to, go to the hospital for some reason, if you decide that you want to report to the police, we're there for you so that you don't have to do it alone.
I want to just add too that if you're looking for help, but you don't necessarily want to report to the police, you don't want to go to court, you can always reach out to us and we will be responding and kind of giving the help with whatever you need. It's really important that if you are experiencing something like this, that you get to decide what happens next. So you can come to us for help with counseling without having to have the police notified or your parents notified. We also have therapists who are working with the schools. So if you wanted a friend to ask a counselor to reach out to our program, to ask for one of our therapists to come to school to talk to you or to just ask more questions, you're welcome to do that as well.
Arth, are you ready with the next question? Thank you so much to Ms. Bachman and Dr. Prince.
Of course. So those are great answers. So again, to Ms. Bachman, Dr. Prince, also Ms. Varia, are all of these services equally available for teenagers? Do the teenagers' parents have to be involved in these processes at all?
Well, some good news is that there's a new law that passed, and Debbie could even echo more on that too, because we've all advocated for this, is that for the age of 12 years old and older, you don't need your parents' consent to receive counseling. So, and also too, you can get one initial session at any other age before your parents have to consent to that as well, which in all said and done is that we can help too with initiating services.
And I would just like to add, so that applies to the Victim Assistance in Sexual Assault Program, VASAP, and the Montgomery County Crisis Center. For the Montgomery County Family Justice Center, that is an arm of the court. So if you are under the age of 16, they do need parental consent to be able to do safety planning and offer counseling. But again, if you are under the age of 16, I think that VASAP is definitely the way to go.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, our next question is specifically about reporting to the police, and it's for Captain Dom. If someone wants to report a case to the police, what do they do? And what do they do if they aren't sure, if they want the case to go forward, but just want to find out what their options are?
Thanks, Annie. That is a great question. So reporting to the police really comes down to telling a police officer, and you can do that in a couple of different ways. You can call our non-emergency line at 301-279-8000. You could ask to speak to the CEO who's assigned to your school, if you have one there. You could also call my Special Victims Investigations Division and ask to speak with a detective whose specialty is in this type of specific investigation. I want everyone to understand at the end of today that when you consider reporting to the police, the investigations conducted by my detectives are victim-centered and trauma-informed. That means that if the victim makes a decision not to move forward in court or decides that they no longer want a police investigation, the detectives here respect that decision. We can arrange for services. We are in pretty consistent contact with social workers at Child Welfare Services or through the Crisis Center. We are able to assess or help you get resources. We can speak with crisis counselors with you. And on many occasions, after you report to the police, the first interview that you'll go through is actually with the social worker. So keep that in mind as well. I really want everyone to understand, though, that should they choose to come forward and report to law enforcement, that decision is their choice, and they can take that back at any time.
And I want to add one last thing to what Captain Dom said. The individuals that you see on the screen and many others, we collaborate with each other. So if one of us is working with you and you want to be connected to the services that Dr. Prince and Ms. Bachman provide, we will help make those connections for you. My office is actually co-located. It's at the same place where Smitha's office is. So we're together, and there are a lot of other services that are offered there at the Family Justice Center. You can see her logo probably popping up on your screen now. So just know that it's a collaborative effort, and really want to emphasize what Captain Dom just said, although she just said it, which is it's your choice. It's your choice. I think there's a question here I see in the Q&A. What if you don't want your parent to find out what's going on? I would direct that back. Sorry, Annie and Arthur, I'm looking at the chat and realizing that kind of fills in here. So I'm going to just throw that one at our panelists to answer. I don't know who wants to address that first.
So I can go first. From our perspective, there are situations where we are under obligation to notify parents, and we can certainly walk you through what that looks like. Listen, I was a kid once too. And I think that my parents scared me more than anyone else scared me at all. And I can certainly understand that. I can also understand the pressure and the need to find someone to help. I don't know, Dr. Prince, would you like to take it from your perspective on counseling?
Right. So, once you've reached out to the office or a trusted adult, if it's not through our office, it is a process, and you have gone through something extremely traumatic, and you have a right to want to take your time letting folks know what happened. And maybe some folks, you don't want them to ever know. This is considered one of the big secrets that folks hold within inside of them. So, as you've heard, the big thing is that, this is your ship, and we're here to help you steer it. And however long it takes, or whatever it takes, or whatever you decide, we're here for you. And maybe in the initial moments, you don't want to tell your parents. That's okay. And maybe in a year, you want to tell your parents. That's okay too. The most important thing to know is, especially nowadays, as we've all been so isolated and alone, is that you are not alone in this. We are here to help.
just
Thank-
want to I'll throw in something. And I do think, sometimes kids might want to tell their parents, but be afraid of the reaction, not know how to approach it, be worried about what their parents are going to say or how upset their parents might get if they hear something like this. And I think that's something that therapists can help with as well. So counselors at school, VASAP therapists, or a private therapist to work through what you think might happen if you tell your parents, and how to manage that and how to present it in a way where you feel comfortable and you can kind of practice or work up to telling your parents. So it's not always, I'm never going to tell them, or I'm going to tell them right now. And that's part of what working with a therapist helps in terms of figuring things out and figuring out what your pace looks like. So if anyone's struggling with that, please reach out and we can try to help.
If I can mention one more thing to keep in mind when we talk about reporting, it is extraordinarily important when we talk about the role of social media in allegations of sexual assault. What we see a lot of is anonymous people posting about the experiences of other people who have been sexually assaulted. And I'm wondering, I'm sorry, I'm putting you on the spotlight here, Dr. Prince, without a whole lot of warning. But I understand the re-traumatization and the re-victimization that can occur in some of those situations. Could we just talk about the importance of considering the victim when we're talking about if it's a friend or someone else and making these anonymous allegations?
Right. There are so many moving parts in this. And whether or not it's something that Amy's Captain Dom's team is dealing with, sorry, or that, the legal side is dealing with.
You can call me Debbie.
Debbie, thank you, Debbie. What Debbie's dealing with, you just have to be very careful, and two, it's someone else's story, right? Not story. This is someone else's experience. And that's for them. It's not for anybody else. And you take that away. So allow for the process to happen. Allow for healing to happen. Allow for the justice system to work. Now, I know everyone gets very emotional in these situations, which is justified. And we want for folks to, not do these things. And with that passion behind it, yes, we want to step in and we want to say this and we want to do that. But in some situations, that doesn't help. The best thing to do is to be there for your friend. Listen to your friend, right? Be compassionate to your friend. It's not helpful when you go on social media and post all kinds of things or attack other people or attack that person or anybody. It's just best to be a supportive friend.
And Dr. Prince, I'm actually there's another question in the Q&A that is along these similar lines. So I'm going to ask that now. If you have documentation of sexual harassment and the victim is mentally unable to choose the next course of action, what should you do with the documentation? So this is sort of in the lines of how to help a friend, but also, it sounds like someone may have information about sexual harassment that's happening. My simple answer would be to talk to a trusted adult, but maybe that's too simplistic.
So depending on the situation, we all have the right to report something that's not right. So if it's someone who's especially vulnerable, there's aging, Colleen, you may have to jump in for me. Is it aging and disabilities where we're mandatory, us as therapists, but even you as an individual, you can always report to say, my friend is vulnerable and they need this help. Now, then they can take it from there. Or you can call our office and we can help and report in that way and take it from there. Also the best thing is just to call for guidance and then we can navigate where you want to go with that or what needs to happen. I know it feels like a hot potato in your hand. You can pass it. We'll take it.
And I think that also answers really another question in the Q&A, which is, what if someone is being threatened not to tell anyone that they're being sexually assaulted? How can a bystander help? So Smitha went through a lot of the, the sort of steps that a bystander can take. But again, I think, again, not to oversimplify it or hot potato it, as Dr. Prince was saying, but call VASAP, call and talk to someone, and find out how to help your friend. Because one of the big issues with someone that's being victimized or in a power and control dynamic is you don't want to tell them what to do. It doesn't help. And it's actually, it's really not the best course of action, sort of that's a research-based thing that I'm saying, like, that's not the way to go, because they're already being controlled. So really, it's a much more delicate process. And I'm clearly saying it very indelicately. I'm not a mental health provider, but I know that, if someone is in a bad situation, like a domestic violence situation or a situation where they're being sexually assaulted, to say to them, what are you doing? You got to tell someone. Why don't you leave that person? Why do you keep going back with that person? That's actually not the way to go, because they're already being controlled by the person that's doing all those things to them. It's exactly what was being said before. Support your friends, stand by them, go with them, offer to go with them, make a phone call with them to VASAP or to the Family Justice Center or to any other resource or service provider. Make that call, go to your counselor together, and get that additional support. Don't try to fix it for them, if you will. I don't know if the other panelists.
There was a question in the chat that was very similar to that earlier, and I tried to answer it, and it's actually a really complicated question to answer. So if you have a friend where something bad has happened, but they still want to be in that relationship or have that person who treated them badly in their lives, it's really tricky, because just like you don't want to be the one who's telling them what to do, just like that other person was, but you also want them to start to kind of gain back, I'm going to do this next, and that's my choice. So much of a sexual assault takes away all of the person's power over their own body. We want them to gain back some of that power about what happens next regarding their story, regarding who knows. So you as a friend, and feel free to contact VASAP to try to talk through, how do I help my friend? I'm worried my friend might be in danger. There are ways to talk to people about what they can do to think about safety. If she's not ready to talk to us, or if he's not ready to talk to us, you can talk to them about how they can think about what to do if something becomes dangerous or scary. So we can support you as kind of the community in helping people who might be in bad situations.
Thank you so much for all that. I'm going to flip it back to Annie and Arth if you want to ask the next question.
Of course, I think we've seen some really insightful remarks. I'm really glad we've had this conversation. I had one other question I would like to ask. So because I've seen this come up a lot. So if someone is asked to send either nudes or bikini or underwear pictures by a peer, maybe a friend or a classmate or even a romantic partner, could either party get in trouble for that? What should someone in that situation do? And so either Captain Dom or Ms. Feinstein, if you could answer this.
So I'll jump in
Catherine, you wanna
first
start?
because
Yep.
I'm sure that Debbie will add as well. But the first thing I want to say is, first of all, theoretically, both people could be in trouble, but the internet lives forever. I'm glad that it wasn't around when I was a kid, but it makes these types of activities, right? It's one bad decision that can impact you for the rest of your life. So there are ramifications, right? When you talk about what happens next. So my first piece of advice is not to take these types of pictures and not to send them to anyone else. Now, I know that that's not always the easiest thing to do. If somebody asks you for the picture, the easiest thing to do, of course, is to say no. If someone else sends you a picture of themselves, delete it. Tell them not to send that kind of picture to you anymore. You can report that type of activity to the police as well, and definitely do if they continue to send you these types of pictures. Child pornography also applies to selfie pictures, even if it's a picture that you do consent to sending someone else. That's because even when you send it to a trusted person, it can be shown to other people, it can be distributed to other people. This can happen without your knowledge. And again, the internet lives forever. Sometimes these pictures, we see these pictures being sent to thousands of other people. And once that happens, there really isn't a way to effectively, completely remove those images from the internet. I'm sure Debbie wants to add.
So I was just going to add, really sexually explicit photographs, nude pictures of individuals engaged in sexually explicit activity or that are in a sexually explicit way. I'm going to just be like even clearer than that, like, posing, showing your genital area, showing your breasts, that kind of stuff in a posed way that, connotes sort of it's sexually explicit or obscene. Again, as Captain Dom said, even if you take it yourself, it's a crime because it's that photograph that's being produced of an individual that's under the age of 18. The law really wants to protect kids from getting these types of photographs circulated and out there, and just sort of and so it's a criminal act. That being said, the goal of my office when these photographs are taken is around education the first time. And so it's really don't do it, because it could be a slippery slope and it could get you in trouble. And there could be criminal charges. It's not ideal. We really just try to educate and help kids not, learn that this is not the way to go, because as Captain Dom said, the internet does kind of capture this information forever. There are websites that help you learn how to scrub some of the information, but it's never completely gone. And it could pop up later. People could Google you when you're looking for a job, and they could find this picture of you. So my guidance is always don't circulate pictures, period. It is in fact illegal to circulate these kind of, naked pictures, and, that are sexually explicit. If your picture is posted online, there are resources to help you, get it down, to get it removed. And you can contact the police department. You can contact my office. We can direct you to resources to how to do that. And I think that's really what I wanted to add. I don't know if Catherine, you have anything to add on top of that.
We spend a lot of time talking to kids and parents about exactly this type of activity. And I think it's important to know, we've seen a lot of students get images on their phones and come forward and say to a trusted adult, I got this image, what do I do? Right. And that's important to understand that all of us have a role in stopping that type of activity, making it clear that you don't want to see it anymore, and ensuring that you're not the one spreading it. This type of activity is really harmful for the people and the parties that are involved. It's something very, very private, personal, being spread about an individual to what could be hundreds of thousands of people. So please understand the potential impact that this type of decision has, not only on you, but on the person whose image that you're sharing. And really proceed with that understanding in your mind to stop the activity and to make really smart, responsible decisions.
Right. And to echo what everyone's saying, and let's say you made the mistake and you did send an image and you know that you did, it's a good time to speak to someone that you trust to say, I made a mistake. I sent this image. Let's get ahead of this. Let's try and get ahead of the ball, get people involved that can help to support you through this. Like Debbie said, like Captain Dom said, like how we can start to clean up what's online. Also too, just to get the support around you too, so that the future isn't so bleak. Like there's the other side of the coin, and how can we move towards that way? And the best thing to do is to start to speak to someone. If you can, don't keep it so quiet, let someone trusted that know that it happened so that you can get the help that you need. I can't echo enough, while many of us do feel alone right now or have had to deal with a lot of big situations, whether it's family at home, not being able to get away from them, or all kinds of things. We're seeing the COVID stuff roll back. I don't know if you guys are wearing masks still or not. Maybe not. I don't think so at MCPS schools anymore, right? So the doors are open and we're all here.
And, one of the last things that I want to say, and I talked about this a little bit in the presentation, is there is a crime of revenge porn. So if you make this mistake, you send, a sexually explicit photo to someone, and then that person, not really your friend anymore or whatever, decides that they want to forward it to 1,000 of their friends or put it on the internet or do anything like that to get back at you for some reason, that is a crime that my office will be prosecuting for. So forwarding that information, if you get a picture from someone and you forward it to, embarrass the person, to get them in trouble, whatever, that revenge porn is a crime, and that is one that we will be prosecuting. So I want to make that super clear. Sorry, got a little strident there, but I feel really strongly about it, because that's where, that's really the scary part about all of this, right? Is you've got your information out there and then it spreads like wildfire, and that was never what you intended. But that's the problem with sending these photos, is there can be unintended, really bad consequences. So anyway, I think we've sort of talked about that subject quite a bit. Annie and Arth, you want to ask another question?
Sure. Just looking at the Q&A, there are a few questions coming in about what were to happen if someone is falsely accused of either rape or a different form of sexual assault. And people are kind of just wondering how they can navigate that. I guess this can go to Captain Dahl first.
So one of the things that's really unique about many of the investigations that are conducted here at Special Victims is that it's a multi-agency collaborative approach, which means that we have a lot of adults who are trained in whether it's behavior that indicates that maybe something's not quite right, or even just sitting down and discussing cases together from a multi-agency perspective that allows us to take these types of reports on a case-by-case basis and really figure out what needs to happen next. And my detectives are really good at figuring that out with our partners and being able to make decisions and come to these types of investigative conclusions that we've gotten really pretty accustomed to doing that with agencies like the state's attorney's office, with child welfare services, or with the Treehouse Child Advocacy Center. So is it possible that someone is accused of rape that didn't commit rape? Yes, that's absolutely possible. And it's something that we keep in mind. I want to note, though, that every time that an individual comes forward and reports something like rape, the first thing that our investigators do is start by believing. And we really do take our investigations from there. Debbie or Dr. Prince, would either one of you like to add to that?
I think what I would add to that is, here's a lot of the way that the process works is, so that, the case is going to come in. So maybe there's an arrest, right, to start, and that's the way the case comes in, or maybe someone comes forward and reports it, and then it gets investigated before that. Either way, we are collaborating with the police about these cases, and my office has the opportunity to ask more questions, even if we have them, and to really try to dig at what the truth is. And the other piece of that is that the way that the police conduct their investigations, and the captain just talked about this, they are truth seekers, right? They're going to start with believing, and then we're going to evaluate every single piece. Certainly, we would never want someone, to be prosecuted for something that they did not do. So we're going to look for all information. And that includes if there's a lawyer that represents, the defendant or the respondent. Respondent is what you call sort of the person that's being charged in the juvenile system. And that lawyer can provide my office with information. That lawyer can provide the police with information. So if you believe that you're falsely accused of something, get that information, to the authorities, and make sure that we have an opportunity to review it. The other thing that you could do is seek help, and get some counseling and some guidance about what to do next. I will say that although there's this myth out there about false accusations around sexual assault, the number of false accusations, there have been studies on this, is very, very low. And I just want to make that point also. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, and I'm not saying that people can't be vindictive and lie about things. But the actual numbers are pretty low. And I don't know if Dr. Prince or Ms. Bachman can speak more to that.
Yeah, I wanted to, sorry, I got really close to the camera. I wanted to say, like, the whole point of us, well, not the whole point, but a big point of us coming today is to share this idea of consent, right? So, I get the idea that people are going to be fearful that, oh my gosh, I could be accused of this. To get ahead of that, if you are in a situation with someone and it is unclear that they want to move forward with you sexually in any way, the safest thing to do is to stop, right? That just clears it all up. So then there's no worry about if you did something that made someone else feel uncomfortable, right? So that, that's just something to think about, right?
I think that's a really good point. It's not just, consent isn't just, protecting yourself from being accused, but you're also protecting that you aren't doing something to somebody that makes them feel bad and hurting somebody. So it's really important that, we all kind of take this idea of caring about each other as other people. You wouldn't want to put somebody in a position where they were upset or felt violated or felt hurt. And it's also protective for yourself.
And just a quick reminder from some of the things we talked about in the presentation earlier, that if there's drinking or drugs or any sort of incapacitation involved, nobody can consent in that circumstance. So always be aware of that. That's just not a situation where the person can consent, and you have to get to that affirmative yes. For a long time, people talked about no means no, not anymore. Yes means yes. Get to the affirmative yes, and spread the word to your friends. Get to the affirmative yes. That is the culture, and it may not sound sexy. It may be like, wait, I have to stop. I got to ask, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, you do. You do for yourself. You do for your partner. It is the way to go in 2022. It was the way to go forever also, but we really are, we're really talking about this a lot because it is just so important. Colleen, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Yes, sorry. I thought I'd raise my hand. So I just noticed in the chat, there's also a question about consent being coerced. So if somebody feels pressure or there's a threat, if you don't say yes to this, I'm going to do this, that's not really giving consent. So coercion or manipulating or threatening or saying, I'm going to tell so-and-so that you did this if you don't do what I say, that's not true consent. And that is considered coercion.
Mm-hmm.
So Colleen, I think that leads into the next question in chat, which was, what was the best way to ask for consent? Do you want to tackle that one?
Sure. I think Smita gave us some great kind of snippets in her slide about things like, is this okay? And asking at every step along the way. Is it okay if we do this? How do you feel about this? You're checking in with the other person that you're being intimate with and caring about what they have to say and if they're feeling okay about it. I think what not to say is, you said okay before, now you don't seem okay, but we're going to do it anyway because you said okay before, right? All of that stuff is where it starts to get really murky, and you want to let somebody make their own decisions and be in control of their body. That's part of caring about that person, is having them be okay with every step along the way and checking in, and making sure that people are feeling okay.
Thank you so much. Annie and Arf, what do you have for us next?
All right, thank you all so much for that. I wanted to direct another question to Dr. Prince. So if someone needs medical help or wants to get a sexual assault exam, what are the steps that they should take to go about that?
Okay, so there's a few ways you can do that. One, you can walk into a local hospital near you. Mainly the hub in the county for these exams is the Shady Grove Medical Exam Suite, the forensic unit there. But if you do go into another hospital, the supports are still there. So once you arrive at the hospital, this is the first scenario, I'll give you a few different ones. Once you arrive there at the hospital, what happens is it triggers the SART. So that's a sexual assault response team. And that's first the advocate, if you give permission for that person to come so that you're not alone, and that person will show up at the hospital and be with you through that process. Then if you give permission that you want to report to the police will then show up so that you can give your report. And then the nurse does the forensic exam and collects the evidence. So you're kind of coded in all kinds of support during that process. Another way that you could do it, you could walk into any entry point. You could walk into the FJC. You could say, I was sexually assaulted, and they will direct you to medical help. You could speak to a police officer through Captain Dom's can, and they will also too send you through that way. But once you get to the hospital, that automatically initiates the SART. So that means that all the help that you need starts when you walk through the door at that hospital. Or you can even just call our office and we will coordinate everything for you. Whatever you need to get there, we'll make sure that you get there and you have everything that you need once you're there. And once you're there, there's clothing, we give these little cute teddy bears that you can hold. There's all kinds of things in this lovely bag that we have that is there for you. So I hope I answered the question. Did I miss anything, Colleen?
I might have missed it, but I think one important thing to note too is that you can present for the medical exam without having to give your name. So if you're not ready yet to say you want to prosecute or to let authorities know or anything about that, you can come in as a Jane Doe and get medical care.
Mm-hmm.
Or as a John Doe.
Or John Doe, sorry.
Or as a non-gendered Doe.
Doe.
Right, exactly. Basically, as an anonymous report, you can come in and even if you're not anonymous when you're getting the exam, you still don't have to involve the police. You can get all of the medical help without involving police. I'm not saying that we shouldn't, go after people that, rape people. I'm a prosecutor. I want people to be held accountable for what they've done. However, I'm not going to tell someone what their path is going to be. If you are a survivor of sexual assault, you are going to be the one that is going to make those decisions. Unless maybe the person is a serial rapist and raping tons of people and there's a community safety issue. So there's some things that we balance in there. I want to just be honest and clear about that. But really, we want you to drive that path. And the other thing that I would add about going to the hospital is it's not just to collect evidence, it's to get help. You'll get tested for sexually transmitted infections. If you're afraid that you might be pregnant, you can get Plan B. You can get other medications that you might need to make sure that you don't contract any illnesses. I mean, if you are injured in any way, they're going to treat those injuries. So it's not only sort of this forensic exam that you hear about, like a sexual assault exam, it's also a full medical exam to make sure that you are okay, top to bottom. And that is the job of the people that are at the Shady Grove, Adventist Health Medical Center in this suite. And we are so fortunate in our county to have such experienced, trained, compassionate professionals that are giving this service to our community and are really, really caring and good at what they do. So I would encourage anyone that has been sexually assaulted, again, even if you don't want the police to be involved, if you want to get checked out and make sure that there's nothing else going on, particularly STIs, you can go do that anonymously, and you can get the help that you need.
Right. And they'll hold that evidence. So if even down the road you decide like, now I'm ready to go to the police with this, it's still there. It doesn't go away.
And we
Up to
get
you.
that. We will get cases that someone, something happened to them 10 years before, and they just weren't ready or in a place that they wanted to go after the person that did that to them. There's no statute of limitations on reporting a crime of rape. So I think that that's also an important piece. So I want to address one question that came in earlier that I realized I missed. There was a really good question that was asked about statistics on Asian American and Pacific Islander individuals. And I did some quick research while we were talking earlier. And that is definitely an oversight that we didn't include that information. There's not a lot of information out there, but I'm going to read you what I found. And it not only includes Asian American Pacific Islander women and other, not just women, but there's also statistics around Latino and Hispanic and Native American. Most of the stuff that I found related to female, girls who are identified. So I'm just going to read you the statistics. So this was a 2017 report that nearly 1 in 5 teens reported being sexually assaulted. So we talked about that earlier. And that for Black, Latina, and Native American girls, the percentage who experienced sexual assault, experienced sexual assault was above the overall average at 22%, 24%, and 23%, and it jumped to 38% for LGBTQ teens. And that was sort of consistent with what we had said earlier. And then the report around AAPI was 1 in 4 Asian American and Pacific Islander women and 1 in 10 Asian American and Pacific Islanders in general experienced contact sexual violence in their lifetime. So that's sexual assault. So there is more information out there, but I will tell you that there's so much more research that needs to be done, particularly with people of different racial, cultural backgrounds, and all sort, anything sort of that even sort of the gender issue that I addressed when we were talking earlier. There's a lot more research that needs to be done, and it's pretty nuanced, and also the type of care that may come and the culturally sensitive, care that may come and the services that are provided. That's something that is very much a part of the provision of services in our county as well, to try to do things in a culturally sensitive and appropriate way. And there's actually an organization that partners with the Family Justice Center that actually specifically works with Asian American and Pacific Islander individuals who are victimized. So we have a partnership with that project as well. And so I think that's a really good question. And I didn't want to forget to answer that one because it was definitely an oversight in the initial part of the program. And we definitely need to add that. So thank you so much to whoever asked that question. Annie and Arth, what is the next question that you have? And I'm going to just take a quick look at the Q&A also and see if there's more too.
Sure. So the next question is for either Dr. Prince or Ms. Bachman, and it's a little like hypothetical situation. My friend's significant other is abusing them. I don't know how to help. What should I do?
So I think a lot depends on what the friend wants from their other friend. So, I think we talked about this a little bit, that we want people to kind of own their own story and take the next steps. I think it's hard when there's a safety and a danger issue involved. So if somebody is being abusive and is potentially in harm's way, I think a friend could call and ask how to help their friend. I think if the person who is being victimized isn't ready to come forward or tell anybody, one thing the friend could do is offer to call them or call us with them to talk about safety planning, about what to do next, about what to watch out for, what are some red flags. If something is getting worse or more scary, maybe then with the information, the person in the relationship can see those red flags and say, I need to tell somebody, this is too big for me, I need some help. So we really want to make sure that people are kind of owning their own next steps, but also that they know what's out there in terms of safety and have thought about how to be safe. So encouraging either you to call as a friend to ask how to talk about that with your friend, or the person themselves calling with support. I think that's probably the best starting place, is one, to see what they want to do next. And if you're worried about their safety, to talk about how to talk to them and how to support them in figuring out what's safe. Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure too, in those types of situations, you as a friend feel helpless as well. Like, you don't want to see your friend hurt, and you don't want your friend to be experiencing those things. And that's a very helpless kind of feeling that you may have. So reaching out for help yourself, to, like Colleen said, to go ahead and see what I can do to get supports for me. And then the other piece too is letting that friend know how you feel. If that's your friend, you can be honest and say, I am concerned about you, and what can I do as your friend to help you? And if they say nothing now, don't take it personal, right? Just take it and say, okay, but here are the supports that you can use. All right. And you can get those supports from our office. You can get them from the Family Justice Center. You can get it from the police department, but just be able to say, well, here is what it is. I am here if you need me.
Thank you so much. Annie and Arthur, are there any other questions that you have?
So this one is for either Ms. Bachman or Dr. Prince again. This is kind of a question we had prepared, but then someone asked this again in the Q&A on more of what would actually happen. So if someone is afraid to say no to their partner, what should they do? And in the Q&A, they elaborated saying that if someone gave consent to another person, and both parties participated in whatever action it was, but someone internally didn't feel comfortable actually doing that. So they gave consent, they said it, but they didn't actually mean it. If they felt they were assaulted and they reported it, could the other party get in trouble? Who, if anyone, would kind of be at fault? That makes sense.
So, as we talked about consent being fluid, so you can give consent and then you can take consent away, right? Well, let's say you gave consent, but you didn't mean it. And that happens, and it happens a lot, right? Now, there's you have like the legal side of things, and then you have what happens inside of you and how you feel inside your heart and your mind, and how you feel, right? At this point, the most important thing is to focus on your health, how you feel inside. So when you seek help, or you speak to someone that you trust, or if you reach out to the office, or whatever you decide to choose to do, is that you kind of talk about what you felt and you start that healing journey on that path, right? It's not, I know justice it's this big thing, right? And it can look like all different kinds of things, right? And it could be someone locked away in a cell, or it could be someone being punished, or it could be you doing something heroic to help other people. So I hope I'm answering this question. So maybe in that moment you gave the consent and then you took it away. Inside, you didn't really feel it. You can get support in those feelings. Now, if you're thinking that someone may get in trouble for that, or they may get in trouble for that, I don't know if at that initial moment after it happened, if that's the most important thing. The most important thing is to get the help that you need and then worry about what the next steps are, right? Then plan for the next steps.
Yeah, I mean, and the other piece about that too is, just, if you report it and it's not a crime, it doesn't mean that it wasn't something incredibly negative that you experienced. It may not be something that my office can prosecute someone for, but it doesn't mean that it's any less real in terms of the impact on you. And that's why, we can't really say enough, get that help and support, and help understand, how you can move forward, if you can move forward, how that's going to work, sort of all the things that we've been discussing. So anyone else have anything to add on that? Otherwise, I'm going to turn it back to Annie and Art to ask another question. Okay, Annie and Art.
Okay, our next question is one of the ones that we had prepared, but we also did see a few questions about it in the chat. And it was briefly touched on in the slideshow presentation, but I think it was that people are kind of just wanting more clarity. What if both parties involved in a certain act are drinking or taking drugs, say at like a party scene? Can sex be consensual in that situation? And this can first go to Ms. Feinstein.
No, it can't be. It can't be. If people are incapacitated by drugs or alcohol, they can't give affirmative consent. And it doesn't even, under the law, it's a separate category. It doesn't even have to be forceful in those circumstances. It's like a standalone thing. It's like if you have sex with someone that is unconscious, sleeping, incapacitated by drugs or alcohol, it is rape, period. So of course we have to prove that that's what happened and prove that the person knew that the other person was incapacitated and that they were incapacitated to the point that they couldn't consent. And there's a bunch of legal criteria, but the very simple answer is no. I don't know if anyone has anything to add to that. Look, like a lot of people get into, we're talking real life here, right? You go to a party, people are drinking, and you just have to be super careful. We've talked about this many times that, you want to protect yourself and you also want to protect someone else, that same person that, in the question that we were just talking about, what if that person consents, but then they didn't really mean to consent because they'd had, 3 beers and they just said yes because they were feeling, pressured and uninhibited or whatever. But they really didn't want to consent. And then they're in a situation the next day where that's not what they wanted and they've been drinking and it's all just a problem. So that's, again, kind of an inartful way of answering that. But the simple answer is no. I don't know if anyone else has anything they want to add to that.
I think part of the reason it's hard to kind of give a yes or no answer or direct answer other than the one about if everyone's intoxicated is because consent is so fluid and because there are so many variables that can impact somebody's motivation for consenting. There's not necessarily a clear-cut answer. And I think just in terms of looking and caring about, I keep going back to this, like we have to care about each other as people. And if you want to make sure that somebody's okay with what's happening, you wouldn't want to be somebody to traumatize somebody else if things are in the gray area. You wouldn't want to pressure somebody and impact them in that way, in that kind of personal, intimate, violating way, because we know that sexual assault impacts people greatly.
Annie and Art, want to ask another question?
Of course. So thank you so much. Again, to Ms. Bachman, it was a question that came up in the Q&A. Do parents need to be involved when you go to the hospital for sexual assault examinations? Or So this can go to any panelist.
You can go ahead, Rafina.
So if you go with your parents, yeah, they can be involved. If you go with your best girlfriend or your best boyfriend or whoever it is, they can be there with you too. Now, here's the thing. If you go with your parent and your parent's like, she better get that exam, the hospital may say, well, it's up to her, right? So your parents, they can be involved or they can't be involved. You can show up on your own, or if they take you there, you know, you still are going to drive that ship.
I think a lot of these, the idea behind some of this is we want people to get help. We want them to get medical care if they need it. We want people to have emotionally be okay and get the help if they need it. We don't want those sort of external things like fear of prosecution, worried about what everyone's going to say if their name gets out, or what their parents are going to say to stop people from getting help. I think that the systems and the laws are really designed to try to keep things open for people to come forward as they need to, but also for them to have as much access as possible to getting help.
It looks like there's a question. I'm sorry, Annie, go ahead. And then I see some more questions in the Q&A that I want to make sure that we have time to get to.
Sure. So our next one is another one kind of about parent involvement. We had a question in the chat. What happens if you have sex with someone and your parent finds out and they report it as sexual assault, but it wasn't rape or sexual assault? And this can go to Dr. Prince, to anyone.
Or actually probably with Captain Dom, maybe.
I was going to let Rafia speak first if she wanted to, but I guess she can speak second. Sorry,
didn't mean to interject. Go ahead.
You know, when we talked a little while ago, we talked about the types of investigations that detectives here at Special Victims do. And again, those are victim-centered and trauma-informed. That means that what matters is what the survivor comes in and tells us. So that's important to understand. There may be a case where a parent is saying that an individual was raped. When we talk to that person, or when a social worker talks to that person, we find out that something very different happens. And quite frankly, we have these conversations a lot. And that's okay. We want to know how the victim felt. We want to help that person transition in this journey to survivor, right? It takes a lot of different steps. It can go in a lot of different directions. But if the individual engaged in consensual sexual activity, that's okay too. So we want people to just understand that, and understand that when you come in for an interview here at Special Victims, we are taking that victim-centered approach.
I was going to add to what Captain Dom said, is that there's also these age-based sex offenses that Debbie probably knows a lot more about than I do. I try and get through them, but I always get a little jumbled up. But there are some age things that apply where your parents actually do have some say in that.
Right. So there's certain categories of, I mentioned this in the presentation earlier, statutory rape or statutory sexual offenses. And I had mentioned specifically rape, where the victim is under the age of 14 and the perpetrator is 4 or more years older. And that's, consent doesn't even apply. In a statutory situation, consent doesn't apply. Based on the age differential, it's simply a crime. And then when you're talking about someone that is 14 or 15 years old, there are certain acts that if someone is, you know, again, 4 or more years older, it's also a crime. And then if someone's over 21 and you have sex with a 14 or 15-year-old, that is also a crime. So there's all of these. Basically, if there's a big age gap between the individuals in your 14, 15, or 16, 13, 14, or 15, it can be a crime. It is a crime. And also there's crimes related to relationships between, not relationships, but sex between people in positions of authority. So like a teacher, a coach, a counselor, you know, that sort of thing. that applies all the way up to age 18. And so that's another serious offense, and that all falls sort of in the category of child abuse, more in the category of child abuse, and there are mandatory reports related to that, and those are situations where parents may get involved. But when we're talking about peer on peer sexual assault, that's a different story.
There was something in the chat I saw about a teacher giving a back massage to a student that made them feel uncomfortable, then asking for photos and things like that. If you feel uncomfortable, if it's something that gives you those alerts, your body is telling you something, your mind is telling you something, you don't ignore it. Tell a trusted adult. That is not an appropriate behavior if you feel that way.
And we're tracking that stuff. You may not be the only one. And even though the individual moment in time of someone rubbing your back may not be a crime in and of itself, if we start to accumulate information on a particular person in authority, we're going to be looking at that very closely, and it may escalate to something criminal, even if each individual act isn't criminal in and of itself. So we're looking at that all really closely, where we're talking about adults assaulting, touching, making children, minors, I shouldn't say children, you're not children, but minors, individuals under the age of 18, uncomfortable. So we're going to look at that really seriously.
Yeah,
there was a
add
question
to that as well.
Yeah.
When we talk about individuals in the school system or individuals in healthcare, there are certain people who are mandated reporters. That means that if you go to them and tell them that something like this has occurred, they have to make certain reports. Now, keep in mind, there's a question in the chat that talks about, and it's someone else's story. So, we have to take that in consideration. But if you're a survivor and you go to an adult and maybe they don't take you seriously, or you feel like you didn't get the attention that you deserved, please come forward to another one of these resources. Please talk to another individual. It doesn't always have to be through the police department. We can certainly help you access other resources. We've talked about a lot of ways to talk to trusted adults today. And please don't hesitate, like Dr. Prince and Colleen and Debbie have all said as well. Something doesn't feel right, please don't hesitate to come forward and make that report.
Thank you so much for adding that really important information. And in what else do you have for us? And I see one more in the chat that I want to make sure that we don't miss. And I think it was one at 8:39. Oh no, yeah. Sorry, I'm going to interject for 1 second. It says, if someone was being threatened to do something that they do not want to do, what should they do in that moment when they're being threatened? What should they do in that moment? Because they may be afraid, they may be out, someone like bigger than them. And they could literally be afraid for their safety. What do we suggest in that situation? I don't know if Colleen or if anyone wants to answer. I mean, I can also start the answer on that. I think the start of the answer on that is those situations do happen. We used to, when I was in college, and I would go to a party, I was in a sorority, and when we would go to a party, we had something called Sober Sisters, kind of dating myself probably, but basically it was to go in pairs and to make sure that there was another friend that was always looking out for another friend. And I think that's, those are situations, particularly at parties and at group gatherings, that you want to make sure that there is someone else that is looking out for you, so that if, you all of a sudden they're like, where is, Susie Q or whatever, sorry, that sounded weird. Where's, my friend, then they're going to come look for you and try to figure out what's happening. I mean, it's not a great answer. And if you're fearing for your safety, there's also, I want to mention, on Sunday at our RespectFest, we have self-defense classes that we're doing there. And there are other self-defense classes that are available. You can check online. So that may be another thing to look at. But I don't know that, responding with force is always the best answer. And it's particularly if you're outsized, that could be super dangerous for you too. But I think that is a really, really hard question, to answer.
So there's a few, oh, sorry, Colleen, you want to go or?
I was just going to say, we talked about bystander intervention previously in some of the slides. And so being loud, making your discomfort or your fear known is probably a start to get the opportunity to have a bystander intervene. That if there are other people around, letting people know that this isn't okay for you is probably one step to take to allow that process to happen.
Also too, just an FYI. So the body and the mind has a few ways of reacting to a traumatic situation. So if you're in it and you experience these things, like one, you could fight. Debbie's talking about there's that fight reflex. Two, you could freeze. Your body could just give out. Like all you can hear is your thoughts and you can't do anything. The other one, oh, you guys, you might have to help me with the senses. There's fight, freeze, flight. You may run away. You may, let's say, kick that person in the boobs or the nuts and run away. What's the other one? Scream. Oh my goodness, you guys.
I might have gotten them fight, flight, freeze.
Yeah, that's all four of them. So you may experience all of those feelings within that moment, right? And it's going to be extremely overwhelming at that time. So whatever happens when you experience that, and however it plays out, right? Know that that is not the end of the story, right? That you will get away and that there will be help, right?
Annie Narth, what do you got next?
Thank you so much. So one big question that I wanted to address. So what happens if, this is a hypothetical, what happens if my parents aren't supportive of my need for mental health or other services regarding sexual assault experience? And then another big one, what if I don't have insurance? So if I go to a hospital to get a sexual assault exam, would that cost anything? What would that look like? So this could go to either Dr. Prince or Ms. Bachman, any other panelist.
So the state of Maryland, in terms of the forensic exam and mental health treatment and STI treatment, all of these things are covered 90 days after the assault. So if you go in for the exam, that's covered. Mental health treatment through the county is either of no cost or on a sliding scale. With the new law, it's after age 12 that you can reach out for help without your parents. So there are all different kinds of ways to navigate through that. And we have victim advocates to help through that process as well.
So the questions are kind of coming in fast and furious as we're coming to the conclusion of this program. So we're trying to answer them by typing answers to them as we're scrolling through them. There was one question that I wanted to make sure we asked out loud. Annie Narth, did you see the question about social media exposing someone?
Yes, I can.
One of you asked that one.
Yeah. Someone asked, would it be all right to expose your rapist on social media for other people to watch out for them if authority hasn't found enough evidence to send them to jail? I guess this can go to Captain Tom.
And that's a really complicated answer. But I'm going to tell you that social media, right, is a really complicated place. And people are hurt on social media every day on all sides of incidents like this. I am going to encourage you to use social media for posting things like puppies, rainbows, and unicorns. But I also understand that that's not always the reality of what gets posted. I would discourage you from posting any information about events that police are involved in, that are being investigated, that could be potentially prosecuted at a later time. I would discourage you from posting anything about those events on social media. I think that there's a lot to be said about traumatic release and the way that people deal with different events that happen to them. And Dr. Prince, I don't know if you want to talk about that, or Colleen, if you guys would like to talk about that, but I don't think that social media is an appropriate place for any of this type of information.
So I think absolutely, if something's been done to you and you're upset, your natural response is to want to get some of that power back. It's to want to get angry. It's to want to expose people. And it can be tempting. Social media gives us access to so many people, and it's really tempting to try to kind of get that vindication back. I think specifically something Captain Dom said is that if this is being prosecuted, for example, and you put something on social media, it can be used in a trial. It might be different than what you said before. There may be issues that come up as a result of that. So I think there's a lot of kind of harm that can happen to yourself and to other people by putting things out there in kind of a, trying to get the other person back for what's happened.
So it is now 8:58, and I know many of you are impatiently waiting for the SSL hour information, SSL hours information. So I'm going to ask Smitha to explain where you get that information and put it in the chat now, and we'll continue to try to answer a few more questions after that, but at least those of you that are ready to get your form and go, we'll be able to have you do that.
All right, so I'm going to pull up the slide that has the SSL hour form. And if it has a link, and it also has a QR code. Hold on, I'm just having some issues. It's not letting me share my screen. Hold on one moment. Okay. Sorry about that.
We promise you're going to get your form.
Yeah, why don't you all continue with a question while I try and figure out what's going on.
Well, I actually think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say thank you. Again, I see that some of you have seen in the chat, Jerry and Kathy are answering your question. Jerry is Lieutenant McFarland from Montgomery County Police Department Special Victims Division, and Kathy is Lieutenant Estrada from the Special Victims Investigation Division with the Police Department as well. And they've been wonderfully assisting with answering the questions in the Q&A and letting us know when those questions are available. So I wanted to say thank you to them. I wanted to say thank you to Annie and Arth, really and truly so wonderful to have you engaged in this work, part of the Student Advisory Committee, and sharing this information peer-to-peer. Us adults can talk and talk and talk, but I think it's much more meaningful when you're sharing the information peer-to-peer. And I hope that you and the two of you, and that many of you on this program tonight will continue to do that. And lastly, I want to thank Colleen and Rafia and Amy and Captain Dom. I'm using everyone's first name. Sorry, it's getting late. And Smitha for all of the work that they put into this evening, and Smitha for coordinating, and just for the work that they do every day, helping our community and helping survivors of sexual assault. And I hope that this was helpful to all of you. We look forward to, additional learning opportunities. And if you need help, you're not alone. It's not your fault. Seek it out. And if you look at the screen and you'll see it now, you've got your QR code, you've got your information. If you go to a private or independent school, you've got your email address there. Smitha also put it in the, I think in the chat now with the form as well, and the link. So you can click on the link in the chat, that's there too. And I think we're going to wrap up for now. It is now 9 p.m. Oh, and lastly, I also want to thank our ASL interpreters for their hard work this evening doing the interpretation. We're very grateful that you're here. And really, lastly, I want to thank all of you for participating. I don't know if you can see the participant number, but we had close to 350 participants this evening, and that's 350 of you, hopefully, that are able to, just go out and spread the word. And if you have a group that you want to bring this content to, or content about healthy dating relationships to, we are more than happy to, do additional programs. If your school's not offering this and you want your school to offer it, let us know. We will come to you. We want to really spread the word and create a safe and healthy community. So thank you all so much for your participation this evening. And I'm seeing, again, more questions come through. We will stay online for a few more minutes and check out the Q&A as we go. So thank you again, everyone, and have a lovely evening.